Chapter 102. A Bower in the Arsacides. Hitherto, in descriptively treating of the sperm whale, I have chiefly dwelt upon the marvels of his outer aspect, or separately and in detail upon some few interior structural features. But to a large and thorough sweeping comprehension of him, it behooves me now to unbutton him still further, and, untagging the points of his hose, unbuckling his garters, and casting loose the hooks in the eyes of the joints of his innermost bones, set him before you in his ultimatum, that is to say, in his unconditional skeleton. But how now, Ishmael, is it that you, a mere oarsman in the fishery, pretend to know aught but about the subterranean parts of the whale? Did erudite Stubb, mounted upon your capstan, deliver lectures in the anatomy of the cetacea, and by the help of the windlass hold up a specimen rib for exhibition? Explain thyself, Ishmael. Can you land a full-grown whale on your deck for examination as a cook dishes a roast pig? Surely not. A veritable witness have you hitherto been, Ishmael, but have care how you seize the privilege of Jonah alone. The privilege of discoursing upon the joists and beams, the rafters, ridge-poles, sleepers, and underpinnings making up the framework of Leviathan, and belike of the tallow vats, daily rooms, butteries, and cheeseries in his bowels. I confess that since Jonah, few whalemen have penetrated far beneath the skin of the adult whale. Nevertheless, I have been blessed with an opportunity to dissect him in miniature. In a ship I belonged to, a small cub sperm whale was once bodily hoisted to the deck for his poke or bag, to make sheaths for the barbs of the harpoon, and for the heads of the lances. Thank you that I let the chance go without using my boat hatchet and jackknife and breaking the seal and reading all the contents of that young cub. As for my exact knowledge of the bones of the Leviathan and their gigantic full-grown development, for that rare knowledge I am indebted to the late royal friend Tranquo, King of Trank, one of the Arsacides. For being at Trank years ago, when attached to the trading ship Day of Algiers, I was invited to spend part of the Arsacidean holidays with the Lord of Trank at his retired palm villa at Propula, a seaside glen not far distant from what our sailors call Bamboo Town, his capital. Among many other fine qualities, my royal friend Tranquo, being gifted with a devout love for all matters of barbaric virtue, had brought together in Popula whatever rare things the more ingenious of his people could invent, chiefly carved woods of wondrous devices, chiseled shells, inlaid spears, costly paddles, aromatic canoes, and all these distributed among whatever natural wonders the wonder-freighted, tribute-rendering waves had cast upon his shores. Chief among these later was a great sperm whale, which, after an unusually long raging gale, had been found dead and stranded with his head against a coconut tree, whose plumage, like tufted droopings, seemed his verdant jet. With the vast body had at last been stripped of its fathom-deep enfoldings, and the bones become dust dry in the sun. Then the skeleton was carefully transported up the Popula Glen, where a grand temple of lordly palms now sheltered it. The ribs were hung with trophies, the vertebrae were carved with Arsacidean annals and strange hieroglyphics. In the skull, the priests kept up an unextinguished aromatic flame, so that the mystic head again sent forth its vapory spout, while suspended from the bow, the terrific lower jaw vibrated over all the devotees, like the hair-hung sword that so affrighted Damocles. It was a wondrous sight. The wood was green as mosses of the icy glen, the trees stood high and haughty, feeling their living sap. The industrious earth beneath was as a weaver's loom, with a gorgeous carpet upon it, whereof the ground vine tendrils formed the warp and woof and the living flowers and figures. All the trees, with all their laden branches, all the shrubs and ferns and grasses, the message-carrying air, all these unceasingly were active. Through the lacings of the leaves, the great sun seemed a flying shuttle weaving the unwearied verdure. O busy weaver, unseen weaver, pause, one word, whether flows the fabric, what palace may it deck? Wherefore all these ceaseless toilings? Speak, weaver, stay thy hand, but one single word with thee. Nay, the shuttle flies, the figures float forth from the loom, the freshest hung carpet forever slides away. The weaver god he weaves, and by that weaving is he deafened, so that he hears no mortal voice, and by that humming we too, who look on the loom, are deafened. Only when we escape it shall we hear the thousand voices that speak through it. For even so it is in all material factories, the spoken words that are inaudible among the flying spindles. Those same words are plainly heard without the walls, bursting from the open casements. Thereby have villainies been detected. Ah, mortal! Then be heedful, for so in all this dim of the great world's loom thy subtlest tinklings may be overheard afar. Now among the green, life-restless loom of that Arsacidean wood, the great white worshipped skeleton lay lounging, a giant idler. Yet as the ever-woven verdant warp and woof intermixed and hummed about him, the mighty idler seemed the cunning weaver, himself all woven over with the vines, every month assuming greener, fresher verdure, but himself a skeleton. Life-folded death, death-trellised life, the grim god wived with the youthful life, and begat him curly-headed glories. Now with the royal Tranquo I visited this wondrous whale, and saw the skull and altar, and the artificial smoke ascending from where the real jet had issued. I marveled that the king should regard a chapel as an object of virtue. He laughed. But more I marveled that the priest should swear the smoky jet of his was genuine. To and fro I paced before this skeleton, brushed the vines aside, broke through the ribs, and, with the ball of Arsacidean twine, wandered, eddied among its many winding shaded colonnades and arbors. But soon my line was out, and following it back I emerged from the opening where I entered. I saw no living thing within, naught was there but bones. Cutting me a green measuring rod, I once more dived within the skeleton. From their narrow slit in the skull, the priests perceived me taking the altitude of the final rib. "How now," they shouted, "darest thou measure our god? That's for us." "Aye, priest, well, how long do you make him then?" But hereupon a fierce contest rose among them concerning feet and inches. They cracked each other's sconces with their yardsticks, and the great skull echoed, and seizing that lucky chance, I quickly concluded my own admeasurements. These admeasurements I now propose to set before you. But first, be it recorded that in this matter I am not free to utter any fancied measurement I please, because there are skeleton authorities you can refer to test my accuracy. There is the Leviathantic Museum, they tell me, in Hull, England, one of the whaling ports of the country, where they have some fine specimens of finbacks and other whales. Likewise, I have heard that in the museums of Manchester and New Hampshire they have what the proprietors call the only perfect specimen of a Greenland or river whale in the United States. Moreover, at a place in Yorkshire, England, Burton Constable by name, a certain Clifford Constable has in his possession the skeleton of a sperm whale, but of moderate size, by no means the full-grown magnitude of my friend King Tranquo's. In both cases, the stranded whales to which these two skeletons belonged were originally claimed by their proprietors upon similar grounds. King Tranquo seized his because he wanted it, and Sir Clifford because he was the lord of the seigniories of those parts. Sir Clifford's whale has been articulated throughout, so that, like a great chest of drawers, you can open and shut him in all his bony cavities, spread out his ribs like a gigantic fan, and swing all day upon his lower jaw. Locks are to be put upon some of his trapdoors and shutters, and a footman will show round future visitors with a bunch of keys at his side. Sir Clifford thinks of charging 2 pence for a peep at the whispering gallery in the spinal column, 3 pence to hear the echo of the hollow of his cerebellum, and 6 pence for the unrivaled view from his forehead. The skeleton dimensions I shall now proceed to set down are copied verbatim from my right arm, where I had them tattooed, as in my wild wanderings at that point there was no other secure way of preserving such valuable statistics. But as I was crowded for space and wished the other parts of my body to remain a blank page for a poem I was then composing, at least what untattooed parts might remain, I did not trouble myself with the odd inches, nor indeed should inches at all enter into a congenial measurement of the whale. This is the end of chapter 102. So he talks about measuring the whale and going to measure the whale. And the whale, this particular whale, was owned by a king in the South Pacific, King Tranquil. And it beached itself. And after they stripped it, they pulled all of the flesh off and used it for whatever they use the flesh for. Probably some eating, probably some cooking, probably some, rendering down the oil. They took all of the bones and they moved them from the beach up to the king's palace. And the king's palace was like a museum, because that's what a lot of people did way back when they had all sorts of money and power. It's like, okay, I am going to collect the coolest things I can find, and I am going to essentially make a private museum. And a lot of public museums have come from things like this, where people are like, I have more money than I know what I'm going to do with. I'm just going to get all this stuff together and put it in a room, and I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to let other people look at it and maybe charge them for it. So King Tranquil wasn't charging to do it, but the squire who commandeered the whale in the name of the king from a couple chapters back, he's like, yeah, 2 pence to stand here, 3 pence to listen in the skull, 6 to look from the top. And it's like, okay, 2, 3, 5, 11 pence. That's less than a shilling, but still, that's considerable money. I mean, back when you have a halfpenny is a half penny, and that's something actually usable to buy stuff. 11 cents you know, wasn't was isn't an amount of money that people would think about. It's an amount of money. It's like, do I really want to spend 11 cents to stand on the head of a whale and look around? And it's also kind of interesting how he describes the greenery that grew up around the whale. So, in tropic islands, you have, plants just grow everywhere. They just grow wild in the tropics. Lots of sun, lots of heat, lots of water. So the plants just grow and grow and grow. And so it grew up around the whale and through the whale. And Ishmael's like, this is like a giant piece of cloth that's being continuously woven by the plants, by the vines as they grow. And it's being woven through the skeleton of the whale. And he's like, this is life and this is death. And this is the two of them coming together and merging and flowing together. So it sounds kind of cool, and he thinks about it. But here he is. He measures a whale. We have no real advancement of the plot, but he measures the whale and doesn't tell us how big it is. Man, that's frustrating. I guess we'll find out tomorrow how big the whale is.